This is me reading an account of a large Monday meeting at Colet House from the 2nd of July 1989. And on the platform with me were Sue Cassini and Martin Redfern. And there had been a poetry competition, which Tracy Childs had read the entries for competition. So I'm skipping all of that and I'll go on to a meeting. But where we are in the cycle it was 7 years after Dr. Rolls had died, and I'd been trying to follow his instructions and develop the new view that he had at the end of his life. And I'd done a really detailed study of Ouspensky's teaching right after Dr. Rolls died, using all the books and all of Maurice Nicol's writings and making detailed notes and studies, all with a view to trying to get to this new view that Dr. Rolls was after, and particularly seeing everything as he had said from top down, where he said we've had everything upside down and back to front. And then through the 80s, I'd worked with Dr. Peter Fenwick, researching aspects of the ancient Indian Advaita tradition from the Shankaracharya of northern India. And Peter Fenwick and I used to meet every couple of weeks and write papers. And I provided all the non dual teachings, and he provided the current neuroscience. So this is me continuing without Peter Fenwick. And it was quite difficult because I was having difficulties on two fronts. On the one hand, you had all the old Uspenskyites who wanted it to go backwards into an esoteric school, which Dr. Rolls had said was over and done with. But then on the other hand, there was also a lot of fundamentalism from older people on the meditation side who were trying to keep it in a certain form and not let it move forward. So I was having to do this very difficult dance of trying to tiptoe through these two opposing sides who were both hammering me, but from different angles. And I had this wonderful man called John Sampson as my backer, and he had been someone who Dr. Rolls had referred to as his number one man. And he used to meet me at the festival hall and buy me supper. And he would say that he was totally backing me and supporting me when I was up on this platform, because I would have to go up on the platform and deliver a meeting to 200 or 300 people, some of whom were fairly hostile, and yet it was the role I'd been given by Dr. Rolls to do, and I knew I had to do it. So I worked away at it for as long as I could, and then at a certain point I had to step back because it had just become too impossible and my health had gone as a result of the struggle. So this is, as I said, the meeting from 1989. And Philip said, as it is now 7 years since Dr. Rolls died, we thought we would like to have a look at his very final messages to us and to see if we haven't learned to understand it much better in the intervening 7 years, particularly as a result of our study of Sinhavalokan over those years. And Sinhavalokan is a term Vishankaracharya used, which means looking back like a lion to see the measure of movement. And he'd asked us to go over the records of his past, Dr. Ells's past conversations with him, to see if we now understood things differently. So Sue reads, Dr. Rolls, the need now is for simplicity. We have been habitually complicating everything. It is only necessary to be quiet and to keep things simple. We have had everything upside down and back to front. That was from the Sunday meeting of 1982, May 1982. Then he said, there is only one consciousness. The levels are levels of impediment to that consciousness. Everything is that consciousness. That is what we have to feel and know. And then I continued, we will look at the points gradually, but first looking at the idea of upside down and back to front. As a result of Sinhavalokan and our own experience, a very simple model has emerged, which gives us a basis to work from, and we have drawn it up on the blackboard. So drawn up is the diagram I had developed of the three boxes all interpenetrating within each other, as the physical level is the smallest, which is contained within the subtle or psychological level, which is contained within the causal level, which is all contained within the one universal consciousness. And I've also put the three gunas in at the causal level. So I'll include that diagram with the video when I post it so you can see what it refers to. So I continue. Starting with the smallest square, the physical world. This is the world of flesh and bones, physical bodies, and the world around us. It can be weighed and measured by science. It is very, very vast. It includes atomic particles and goes all the way up to galaxies and clusters of galaxies. It includes huge geological timescales in terms of millions and millions of years, and is very vast. Yet from this point of view, seen from the right way around, it is all just a ripple, and David de Bohm describes it as a ripple on the surface of something much vaster. If you move up into the subtle world, the physical world is contained within this much vaster world, which on the individual level is our psychologies, thoughts and feelings. It is the realm of experience. And in the larger world, Shankaracharya describes it as a region of universal mind. He puts here things like universal memory and universal buddhi. All of this is much, much larger than the physical world, yet the physical world is contained within this subtle world. But that isn't the end of the story, because beyond that is the causal world, which again is infinitely vaster than the subtle world. Dr. Rolls and the Shankaracharya have described it as a sort of blueprint and the sort of seedbed where on the universal level, all the laws of nature are there in potentia, as yet unmanifest. They manifest further down the scale. We experience them on the subtle level, and we see them in the physical level. And it is at this level that the Shankaracharya puts the three gunas, and they again manifest throughout the three levels of creation. On the individual level, the causal level also acts as a sort of blueprint, and it is where our essence is. So as we go through life, through repetition, we accumulate all sorts of different tendencies, and they all form a sheath at the causal level. And this influences and determines what happens to us and what we experience at the subtle and physical levels. Again, that isn't the end of it, because all these three levels are again all contained within one universal consciousness. And indeed, all the three levels are a manifestation of that consciousness. They are not something separate. They are all consciousness, and they are all contained within one consciousness. So that is really the essence of the upside down and back to front view. We look at the world around us and we see a physical world, very vast, or we experience our own psychologies, and again they seem very big and they seem to dominate the whole picture. But in reality, it is quite the reverse. There isn't a big physical world and then a little bit of mind inside it, and beyond that, a little spark of consciousness. The way the Shankaracharya is describing it is that there is one vast sea of consciousness, and within that a bit of mind and a little ripple of matter, so it is quite the other way round. Professor Schaefer and David Bohm have both expressed this view. Professor Shaver told us about it in 1985 and 1986, and Martin will read for us. Professor Schaefer: all the views of physics, biology, psychology state that it is by reductionism that the lesser evolves by further and further evolution of structure into the higher. I hope today to get to the point to see where that is absolutely impossible. It can only be that the unity of the higher can be diversified. That was 1985. And in 1986, so we rise from protons, physics, to life or bioforms, to psychoforms. This funny body we have hypothesized suddenly has a brain in it, which somehow has consciousness in it, instead of it in consciousness, end quote. And then I say, will you read this from David Bohm? And David Bohm says, this is a dialogue with scientists and sages. In the manifest order, there is no separation in space and time. For ordinary matter, this is so, and it is even more so for the subtle matter, which is consciousness. Therefore, if we are separate, it is because we are sticking largely to the manifest world as the basic reality, where the whole point is to have separate units, relatively separate anyway, but interacting. In non-manifest reality, it's all interpenetrating, interconnected, one. So we say deep down, the consciousness of mankind is one. This is a virtual certainty because even in the vacuum, matter is one. And if we don't see this, it's because we are blinding ourselves to it. End of quotation. Then I continued, well, that gives the scientist's view of it. But what really concerns us in trying to experience consciousness more is how we can make this idea very practical, and in Dr. Rawls's words, simple. If you think about the idea of universal consciousness, it has enormous implications. It is not just an idea, because it implies that everything you experience is the manifestation of consciousness and is consciousness. We have been very much brought up through our education to look at the world around us as all the product of chance and mechanistic science. But this view of the world is showing us that everything we experience at any moment now is all the product of consciousness. We have to try and make this switch in our attitudes to see it as consciousness, and the Shankaracharya helps with that when he says, quote, within and without are the same, the absolute is in all beings are part of the same, everything exists in Atman, and it is also reflected in the human form. Wherever you look at the Atman. It is not so much a question of looking within or without, but a question of looking rightly or wrongly. That's from Good Company, page 9. And then I continue. So that really shows it in its simplicity. It doesn't require anything very big. As Dr. Rolls said, a simple change of attitude to the world and oneself, and it is quite possible to do that, mentally at least, at any moment now. And Dr. Rolls again shows us how to make it more practical. And when he was talking about unity in 1976, he said, this is Dr. Rolls, there is one thing that many people have said to me, and I felt very much myself. One sometimes counts the number of lucky accidents that seem to happen to one, and one hasn't deserved them in any way. But one suddenly thinks, supposing that had gone the other way, where would I have been? And in fact, these lucky accidents which come to meditators and people who are trying to realize their possibilities increase and increase and increase. And of course, they aren't accidents at all. Has anybody felt this? That really these lucky accidents are totally undeserved, but how nice. That's another way of seeing a certain force pervading everything and to be picked up by anybody in a receptive state. It's all there, we've just got to be receptive. And that was from a small Monday on the 17th of May 1976. And Philip continues, so that shows it in its basics. Now, as individuals, we are all very different, which is very nice. If we were all the same, life would be ever so dull. For some people, the idea of universal consciousness is sufficient, and they can carry that around with them during the day. Others like to know much more detail about the different levels, about the different aspects of mind and our psychology and how it reacts, about the causal level and how the laws manifest, and in the place of essence and how that manifests and determines our lives. And yet others, like Martin Redfern here, want to know much more about the physical level. And that's marvellous because this simple framework provides a basis for all that investigation. And it works marvellously as long as we ought to relate it back to the simplicity and to this one idea of universal consciousness. So, particularly with regard to the experience of this, it would be good to hear from any younger or newer people. How do you find that? And then there was a long silence. And so I said, older people too, exclamation mark, after which there was laughter. And Martin Redfern, I find one of the things about studying the physical world in all its diversity, which is actually wonderful, is that all over the place there are bits of it saying, yelling, screaming, I am that. It is a pointer to the bigger world that encloses it. And I said, that's marvellous, because as we look at the physical world, you see the manifestation of the order of a whole. And if you really, really look at something, you don't just see the physical world, you see the whole picture. And Peggy McLaren said, could you say they interpenetrate each other? And I replied, yes, the way that it has been described by the Shankaracharya, Dr. Rolls, and Mr. Uspensky is that they interpenetrate each other, and each world is contained within the larger world, so it is part of the larger world. So if you take the causal world as a whole, you are taking the causal world, and that includes the subtle and the physical. It is not a separate thing on its own. It is not a little box at the end of the diagram. And again, the same with universal consciousness. It pervades everything, and the three levels are its manifestation. They are consciousness, and they enable us to see and experience it. And Sue Cassini said, so it is where you are actually looking, isn't it? If you are only looking at the physical level, you will only be aware of the physical. But if you are remembering the one consciousness, you will be aware of everything. And I replied, yes, that's the clue to it. It is really a question of what you identify with. This is really Dr. Rolls' idea about the levels being levels of impediment. Because if everything is one consciousness and is the manifestation of consciousness, how can the level be an impediment? The way it becomes an impediment is if I say, I am my physical body, and it is marvellous and much better than yours, and that's all I am. Or if I say, I am my psychology, and it's a marvellous psychology, and it's really clever and better than yours, then I'm getting it the wrong way round, because I am limiting myself to what is a very small part of the whole, and I am saying I am this. So I am creating an impediment out of what is in reality consciousness. With a simple switch of attitude, what would be levels of impediment just become the manifestation of consciousness. So if you switch your attitude, there is no impediment. That's what the above view implies, and what Dr. Rolls is saying. There is only one consciousness. The levels are levels of impediment to that consciousness. Everything is that consciousness. That is what we have to feel and know. It's also the meaning of Dr. Earl's story about the three men climbing the wall, because when they got to the top and looked down, there was no wall at all. And Lynn Nesbitt said, I had a glimmer of understanding about energy the other day, and it seems to relate directly to what Dr. Rolls was saying about happy chances coming one's way. I wondered where energy came from, because one leads such a busy life, and some people say, how do you do it? And I wondered how. Thinking about it, and also reading something the Shankaracharya said, it is to do with the gunas. In fact, all the time one is coming across happy occurrences and things like the daffodils or something which lifts you up, and you are totally in energy and expending energy, and it's like breathing in and breathing out. You certainly know when you are expending energy, but we are not necessarily so aware when we are taking the energy. These happy coincidences which occur, meetings with people, or things we notice in nature, every time they give us a shot of energy on a higher level. And I said, yes, I think that's a marvelous illustration. And then I said, it might be nice to have some quiet. Tiffin. We meditated for a while. And then I said, with such a simple approach, some of you may be thinking, yes, that's all very well. It looks so simple. But in practice, is it actually like that? There are two very nice passages from the Shankaracharya which really show us what to do in relation to this feeling and how to understand it in its simplicity so that we do see everything as consciousness. The first quote really sums up this whole above view because it expresses the view of everything being consciousness and of us being consciousness and part of the consciousness. And yet, for some reason, we look to the small part and we say, I am the subtle level or I am the physical level, and we create a barrier out of what is, after all, consciousness. And the Shankaracharya said, the truth is that one really is the Atman and the Absolute, but one doesn't know the secret because of ignorance. There was a Dhobi washerman. He used many donkeys to carry his load. One day he fell ill and asked his son to load the donkeys and take them of the washing. The son loaded them and tried to move them towards the river, but they wouldn't budge an inch. Seeing they weren't tied up, he was surprised and went back to ask his father. The father said, oh, I should have told you about this. In the evening I touch their feet, as if I am trying to bind them with a rope, and in the morning touch them again, as if I have undone them. The boy did the same, and then each donkey started to move. The donkeys felt they were not free, therefore they couldn't walk. This is the condition of all human beings. The ignorance is illusion. Now it's from Good Company, page 119. And I said, and then if you are not entirely satisfied with that, laughter, the Shankaracharya explains how, as we've mentioned, the repetition of tendencies during our lives and the repetition of the way we look at things creates a veil and it colours our perception. And the Shankaracharya said, if people have regularly come to hear the good words and yet have not found the point of rest, the main reason is the nature of their ingrained tendencies. they still have a certain disturbed element in them, and it prevents them making their own all that is told to them. And then they go back. When they go back, they again get engulfed in their previous tendencies. They should continue to meditate and reflect again and again about what they have heard, so that in due course their previous tendencies will be removed and there will be room for taking in the new things that they have been told. That's Good Company, page 118. And I continue. So again, to return to the above view, it is very much as a result of meditating an automatic process. If you look at it from below, one aspect of your psychology looks at another aspect. But if you go through into stillness as often as you can, it works from above, because the Atman, the universal consciousness, and that's the only part of you that knows what is right for you, gradually removes these impediments from above, and it does it in a very gradual and rather subtle way. I think thus this must be very much connected with what Mr. Uspensky and Dr. Rolls talked about in relation to memory, because it is the memory of the whole picture, and that is self-remembering, remembering who you really are, and that nothing is separate, but it is possible at any moment to turn to it. Then it starts to remove impediments and change attitudes, but working from the causal level. Any comments on that? And Muriel Hoare said, are you saying that memory is a sort of live thing and you are in relation to it in a way? And I answered, I think it is very much a live thing, and it is very much a relationship, because what you are remembering is in fact what you really are in total. And when you become very still, it is not your psychology remembering something much bigger, it is yourself remembering itself. And Steve Wood said, I find with this viewpoint, one of the nice things about it is to remember that it is all a gift. It is not there by chance, it is given to us. Also, we are grateful for that, and we can begin to see infinity in a grain of sand because the heart awakens. And I said, anyone else? And Clifford Bullough, if you take the diagram on an individual level, the universal consciousness would be the Atman, and therefore what you see in the physical and the subtle world is not outside you, but is contained in you. It is somehow a manifestation from the God within you. It is a projection from within yourself rather than something feeding this way. And I said, yes, that's how I see it, but you have to make the switch to upside down and back to front completely. So it's no longer really so much a God within you as you within God. And Martin Redfern, one of the biggest back to front things that has occurred to me in recent months is that this is the way the whole process of creation. This is the way of the whole process of creation. Perhaps that the creator is not something outside the universe who said, okay, let's make a universe. It's something which is actually coming out of the consciousness which is throughout the universe. So in a sense, the creator is within us all. And I said, yes, I think going on from that, and it is unfortunately time to conclude, is again to return to the idea of the levels being levels of impediment. And of course, that all depends on how you look at it. The minute you remember yourself, who you really are, the whole picture, there are no impediments at all. B. Griffiths expressed this very well in his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, the book called The River of Compassion. And on the diagram we have put Maya, or nature of Paramatman, because the word Maya can be understood in two different ways. He writes, Maya is both the power which creates or measures the world, and the world which is thus measured. Later it gets the meaning of illusion, and it is very often translated as illusion. But Maya is really nature considered as the manifestation of God. If we see nature alone and do not see God in it, then we are under the illusion. Then Maya is deceiving us. But when we see God through that Maya, then the Maya becomes the means by which we know God. It depends on our point of view. This whole created world is a manifestation of God, and if we only see that manifestation and do not see God behind it, we are under an illusion. The world itself is then illusion. But when we see rightly that the world is simply a veil through which God is manifesting himself, then it becomes the means to know God. End of quote. And I said, and you will have plenty of opportunity to do that on your summer holidays with all the sand and sea and sunshine. We will meet again on September the 25th, the first large Monday meeting. And Sue Cassini said there was just one last little thing to read out. There have been several requests to use the most recent paper, The Way Forward, as a summer program. This will be available not today, but if people will send a stamped addressed envelope to the office, they will receive one. But I said there is an announcement about the movement, and Mrs. Paddy Crampton said this isn't really supposed to be an announcement. There will now be a rather shortened version of the usual movements evening we have after the meetings, and those who would like to stay on for an hour from about 4 o'clock and watch them would be very welcome indeed. Anyone who used to do the movements and would like to see how their bodies remember them is particularly welcome to pop in at the back. Where they will be quite invisible, I assure them. And I said, thank you all very much.